I want to start this one with the usual reminder that I am not a therapist, not a psychologist, and not any kind of mental health professional. Everything I share comes from personal reflection and research, and this channel has always been, from the very beginning, a learning diary. I share what I observe, what I read, what I figure out about myself, and I hope that somewhere in all of that, something useful lands for someone watching. Today I want to talk about codependency. And I want to be honest about why this topic feels personal to me, while also keeping this informative and useful for anyone who might be navigating something similar. Let me start with what codependency actually means, because it is one of those words that gets used a lot, but is not always well understood. Codependency, in simple terms, is a pattern where a person consistently gives more than they receive in relationships, feels deeply responsible for other people's emotions and problems, and slowly loses a sense of their own identity in the process of trying to take care of everyone else. It is not just being a caring person. It is when that caring becomes the thing you build your entire existence around, often at the cost of your own well-being, your own needs, and your own sense of self. People who are codependent often find it easier to focus on someone else's problems than to sit with their own. They feel uncomfortable when they are not needed. They tend to stay in relationships that are draining or one-sided, not because they enjoy suffering, but because the act of being needed gives them a sense of purpose that they cannot seem to find elsewhere. And many of them, if you ask them honestly, will tell you that taking care of others was easier than thinking about their own life. That last part is something I understand very well. Now, why does this pattern show up so often in people who identify as INFJ? There are a few reasons, and I think they are worth going through carefully. The first is empathy. Deep, absorbing empathy. People wired this way do not just feel sorry for others. They feel with them. When someone they care about is in pain, that pain registers almost as if it were their own. The line between their feelings and other people's feelings can blur in ways that are hard to describe to someone who does not experience it. And when you feel that strongly, when someone's distress reaches you that directly, the pull to do something about it is almost impossible to resist. It does not feel like a choice. It feels like a necessity. The second reason is related to how many people with this personality type grew up. Not all of them, but a significant number. When a naturally empathetic, perceptive child grows up in an environment that is chaotic, emotionally unpredictable, or where the adults are not functioning well enough to meet the child's needs, that child often learns to adapt by becoming the one who holds things together. They become attuned to the emotional state of the people around them, not out of warmth alone, but out of survival. If they can sense what is coming, if they can manage the emotional temperature of the room, maybe things will not get as bad. Maybe they can prevent the next explosion. Maybe they can help someone feel better before the situation deteriorates. That hypervigilance, that constant reading of the room and anticipating what other people need, becomes habit. And habits that started as survival strategies in childhood do not automatically disappear just because the childhood is over. The third reason connects to how INFJs see the world. They tend to be idealistic. They have a vision of how things could be, how people could be, how relationships could feel if everyone was just a little more honest and a little more thoughtful. And when they care about someone, they often hold on to that vision of the person's potential even when the reality in front of them is telling a very different story. They keep trying to reach the ideal. They keep giving chances. They keep believing that with enough patience, enough understanding, enough effort, something will shift. And that hope, which is actually one of their most beautiful qualities in the right context, becomes the thing that keeps them locked in cycles that drain them. Now let me talk about how codependency actually feels from the inside, because I think there is a tendency to talk about it in a way that sounds very clinical and detached from the lived experience. For someone who grew up being the responsible one, the strong one, the one who held things together, there is often a very complicated relationship between their own life and other people's lives. When you have spent years organizing your existence around other people's needs, around managing situations, around being the person everyone else comes to when things go wrong, you eventually lose touch with what you actually want, what you like, what makes you feel okay, because those things were never the priority. They were always secondary to whatever crisis was happening around you. And the strange thing is that this can become genuinely comfortable in a painful kind of way. Not comfortable like it feels good. Comfortable like it is what you know. When you are used to being needed, when you are used to having someone else's problem to focus on, the absence of that can feel disorienting. Like you do not quite know what to do with yourself when there is no one to save, no situation to manage, no crisis to navigate. Because you have been running on that fuel for so long that you never really figured out what the alternative looked like. There is also a specific kind of loneliness that comes with being codependent. And it is not the kind of loneliness that comes from being physically alone. It is the loneliness of always being the one who gives and rarely being the one who receives. Of knowing other people's inner worlds intimately while feeling like nobody quite knows yours. Of being the person everyone calls when they're struggling, and then sitting in your own pain in silence because either there is no one to call, or the few times you tried, the response made it clear that your problems were too much for people to hold. That imbalance, where your capacity to carry others is enormous but the support available to you is almost nothing, is one of the most exhausting and quietly devastating things a person can experience. And because you are naturally inclined to manage your own emotions privately, because opening up does not come easily, because you learned early that sharing too much made people uncomfortable or drove them away, the pattern continues. You carry. Other people come to you. And the weight accumulates. Breaking out of codependency is not just about setting limits with other people, though that is part of it. It is also about figuring out who you actually are when you are not defined by your usefulness to someone else. That is a harder question than it sounds. Because if you've spent most of your life being needed, being the strong one, being the one who holds it together, then removing all of that leaves a very significant question unanswered. What is left? What am I, separate from all of this? That question can feel terrifying, but it is also the beginning of something genuinely worth building. For people who have carried this pattern for a long time, often the first step is not dramatically cutting off everyone who has been taking advantage of their nature. Sometimes it is simply starting to notice. Noticing when you automatically take on someone else's problem before pausing to ask whether that is actually your responsibility. Noticing when you say yes out of fear of what happens if you say no, rather than because you genuinely want to help. Noticing the difference between giving from a full place and giving from a depleted one because you have never learned to stop. That noticing is not selfish. It is the beginning of the kind of self-awareness that makes sustainable, genuine care for others actually possible. Because here is the truth about constantly giving from a depleted place. Eventually you run out. And then you are no good to anyone, including yourself. There is also something worth addressing around religious and community contexts, because codependency is often reinforced in these spaces without anyone recognizing it as a problem. When a community operates on the principle that self-sacrifice is virtuous, that your own needs should always come second to the needs of others, that putting yourself first is somehow selfish or spiritually suspect, it creates conditions where codependent behavior is not just tolerated but actively praised. And people who are already inclined toward giving too much find that their community rewards exactly the pattern that is hurting them. This does not mean community or faith is bad. It means that any framework that tells you your worth is determined entirely by how much you sacrifice for others is worth examining carefully, particularly if you are someone who already struggles to prioritize your own well-being. The process of untangling codependency, of building a life that is genuinely your own rather than one organized around other people's needs, is not fast. It is not linear. And it comes with a real grief, because it involves letting go of relationships and patterns that, however unhealthy, felt like they were the thing keeping you here. Finding a reason to stay on this planet that belongs entirely to you, not to anyone else's need for you, is one of the most important and most difficult shifts a codependent person can make. But it is possible. And it starts with small things. Starting to ask what you actually want before asking what everyone else needs. Letting yourself have an opinion that is not filtered through how others will receive it. Noticing what gives you energy when you are alone, without performing that energy for anyone. Building a life that, even in its quietness and its smallness, is genuinely yours. That is what I am working on. That is what this channel is part of, honestly. Not just learning and sharing, but practicing the idea that my thoughts, my experiences, and my ongoing process of figuring things out have value on their own. Not because they are useful to someone else, but because they are mine. I want to ask you something before I finish. If you have ever recognized yourself in the codependency pattern, whether in your family, your relationships, your community, or somewhere else, what was the moment when you realized something needed to change? And what was the first small thing you did differently? I genuinely want to hear about it in the comments, because I think this is a conversation that a lot of people are having silently inside their own heads, and it deserves to be said out loud. Thanks for watching. If this video resonated with you, please consider hitting the subscribe button. I am currently working toward my goal of 1,000 subscribers, so I can finally monetize this channel and turn this passion into a sustainable part of my future. This is my unfiltered diary of solo living in the Philippines, and your support helps me keep this channel growing. If you would like to help out even more, you can check out the Buy a Treat for My Pets link in the description. My dogs definitely appreciate the love. Make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss the next update. Thank you for being such an important part of this journey. I will see you in the next one.